Yeah, lights are on. How we doing? How we doing, NDC Oslo? All right. That's not the amount of energy that I'm going to find frankly acceptable as the hour. Okay. We're getting there. We're getting there. We're climbing up. Whitney, man, Whitney. Jesus Christ. Love hearing that man talk. So, hey, first of all, I hope you were enjoying some of that breakdancing. As a lifelong fan of the global spirit of breakdancing and how American invented it and continues to suck at it, and every other country's better, which is true of most of American things. I love to share that with audiences, and also want to just set expectations that if you saw however many minutes of that, and you were like, well, that's what's going to happen. No, that's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen? We're going to have a different performance, but it's going to be fun. So in that vein, let's see how this works, Oslo. Let's see how this works. Hi! Oh, that was good. That was good for day 3 of a conference where I know for a fact, because I saw some of you yesterday, some of you people are hungover. So my name's Lemon, and I make websites. I've been making websites for a very long time, and the reason why I continue to make websites is that I'm not good at other things, but also because it's always been a medium that has infatuated me. I continue to be in love with the web, because the thing is, we created a distribution model for content that will never be reproduced. What we did some time ago was somebody said, I'm going to write code on my computer, and you're going to run it on your computer. That's crazy. Nobody would have allowed that in the modern climate, but we've done it, and it works, and it's awesome. So I make websites. I work for a company called Savas Labs. You haven't heard of them. That's okay. Don't worry about it. They're based in North Carolina. You haven't heard of that either. Maybe you have, but don't worry about that either. But I live in Minnesota. I've seen that office twice in my life. And Savas Labs company I work for is a fairly traditional agency with one little catch, is that what we do is when we're doing our sales outreach, we try to figure out how to make 50% of our income for good. So if you're working in the fields of sexual health or climate change, anything in addiction, we will basically try to adjust our rate to make that work. The other half of it, if you got a briefcase full of money, let's make a website for you. But we're a fairly small agency, but I've been proud to be the front-end director of that agency, and that means that I do a fair amount of writing code. I was writing code last night, and I do a fair amount of that, but also I'm doing a whole lot of mentoring and shepherding and documenting, because as we go on, in our careers, one of the things that we realize is that the actual syntax, the writing of the code, isn't necessarily the hardest part. The hardest part ends up being how to avoid making stupid decisions, or rather, how to avoid agreeing with the client when they want to make a stupid decision. So we're fairly multidisciplinary, working in different fields of Vue and a lot of PHP. But the thing that I am always the most interested in is the language that I love the very most, and that is CSS. And that is not the logo for CSS. This is the new CSS, and that logo was never good. That logo was never a good logo. That never should have gotten around to be like, what's CSS look like? It's the number 3. So in fact, one of the new things in CSS this year is this new logo. The logo is Rebecca Purple. If you don't know anything about Rebecca Purple, Google it. It's an adorable story. But this is the logo for the new CSS, which is meant to live alongside other things in the same ecosystem. So for example, it sort of lives alongside JavaScript, and of course, the logo for HTML, which still sucks. It's still a shitty logo, and maybe they'll get around to fixing that one day, but as far as HTML goes, they got some other things they need to fix first. And as far as JavaScript itself, one of the things that I want to try to convince you of a little bit, is that it's possible that maybe you don't need all of that JavaScript. Maybe you do, and if you do, that's great, but maybe you don't need all of that JavaScript. And in fact, if you do not need all of that JavaScript, I got stickers for that too. That's an Etsy page, but like you're here, I'm here, I got stickers. I'm not going to charge you for those. So if you want some, maybe you don't need all those JavaScript stickers. Come on up to me. But anyway, this is a talk about new CSS, and I want you to think about like, well, what is new in CSS? What is new in CSS? And NDC Oslo, I am about to blow your mind. Because what's new in CSS? We have variables. Oh my God. CSS isn't a programming language? Yes, it's a programming language. We have variables. You all came to this talk and you were like, I'm going to learn the cool, cutting edge shit. And you are just learning right now for the first time ever that CSS, did anybody know that CSS has, did you know that CSS has variables? Oh, you didn't? Oh, you didn't know that. You didn't know that. Well, actually, okay, so CSS has variables since 2018. And this is the thing, this is my third time speaking in NDC Oslo, and it's an organization that I love, and it's an organization I appreciate, but it's an organization that frankly sometimes don't pay attention to when I'm talking to them. This is not a stage photo at all. This is me just trying to have a conversation about my talk because I noticed that you all came into a talk that it wasn't exactly titled correctly. It wasn't exactly the title, because the title, in fact, is The CSS You Don't Know About, asterisk. Okay, maybe you know some of this. I don't know what blogs you read. But maybe some of this is familiar, but not all of it. Look, the point is, I'm going to show some features in modern CSS, and it's highly likely that some of this information is new, but maybe it's not. Either way, you're going to learn some stuff about CSS, and we're going to have some fun doing it, and that's okay too. So that's the actual title. In case you need to like report to your bosses, like what talk did you see? Just remember that. Anyway, so we were talking about variables, and so on the topic of variables, I wanted to actually still bring this up even though it's not super new to the spec, because it is still underutilized, and I think that it's still a cool thing. So we're going to start out there. So does anyone write in Sass over here? Anyone do some Sass language? Okay, yeah. So like in Sass, like we've had the idea of variables in there for a long time, which is basically like we're going to define some colors, and then we're going to go ahead and just like use those colors. And like that's fine, that's cool, that's not bad. That's a way to protect ourselves from situations where we're going to tweak the blue just a tiny little bit. And then maybe we want to like variabilize those variables, right? So we're going to have like different versions of our buttons, and like that's going to be neat. So maybe we want to make sure that like we're going to just extend our colors down to say like, well, now we have a primary color, we have a warning color, we have a like whatever. And we've done that thing in Sass for a very long time. And like in CSS, that can look similar, but actually more powerful. Because in actual vanilla CSS, now here's the thing, if you've never written CSS variables, the syntax is gross. It's a gross syntax, you're just gonna have to get used to that. But you've got this idea of like somewhere in the DOM, be it in the root or in your actual element, you're gonna define your variables with hyphen hyphen. The most normal thing that you would ever use to define a variable, hyphen hyphen, we all know it. So we're going to say we're going to define some colors in the root to say like here's our black, here's our white, here's our whatever. And then we're going to like call in those variables with, again, the most normal way. No, there's nothing ever silly about CSS. CSS has properties like word break, break word. CSS has properties like padding box, which means I want my box to be 300 pixels unless it has padding, in which case add that to the total. CSS is never, ever, ever weird. But anyway, so we've got our idea of like calling our variables, and the neat thing about that is that we can actually go through and redefine the variables themselves. We can redefine those variables contextually, which is what I think is really neat about this particular context, is that if you want to do something where, for example, dark and light mode is always the sort of like thing that people rely on talking about with these variable uses. But if you've got something where at any point you need to change what background is, you need to change what blue is, you need to change what border radius is, like on some sort of context, you can do that in the actual CSS, and that variable carries forward. So that's actually, we can create a situation where we've got like our huge button, we've got our secondary button, we've got our warning button, and we've only actually declared the styling of the button itself once to say like, it looks like this, and then we can just like take our variables and take those forward. But I want to go crazy with this. I want to go crazy because I work with designers every day. I love working with designers, and sometimes they have ideas that are nuts, and I go, that's awesome, let's go ahead and do that. So we've got basically this page, and the page is like just a bunch of markdown, right? And that's fine. We're going to just take some markdown. We're going to render that as HTML. Everything's like super duper red. And they're like, well, what if there's like different color themes that exist in our markdown page? Yeah, okay, we can go ahead and do that. Okay, and then dark and light mode? Yeah, okay, we can do that. And we can actually do that with not a whole lot of CSS. So in my root here, I'm going to define my default, like my backup colors of I got my white, I got my black, I got my primary, I got my secondary, and then I'm going to define out in my warm scheme, the primary and secondary color are going to be different. My text color in my actual buttons are going to be different, and I can kind of just define those variables that change in these different contexts, in meaning that I can go into the actual DOM tree as deep as I want to be like, this selector 5 down, if you're this far in, this variable now becomes this thing. So like in this, now we can even define like our something where it's like it's both dark and cool, or dark and grayscale. And with that amount of CSS, we can actually get to something over here, where now we've got a situation where I've got both the light and the dark color scheme, and then inside of that light and dark color scheme, I've got different like warm, cool, grayscale default, meaning that like all I'm really doing is just defining a color palette based on its context, and then just letting that thing fold in. So that actual like color theme part of the CSS is going to be 500 bytes, something like that, which is a neat thing. So in fact, if you're doing something, and if you continue to work in Sass, which I do still, most of the time still work in Sass, you can still use that the other way around, meaning that like you can define your Sass variable, you can define your $sign white as hyphen white, and that means that you can both use CSS variables and not have to do with that weird-ass syntax. So it's a win-win in general. Now, we have had that thing. We have had the idea of our CSS variables for quite a while, but one of the things that is new and went through so many revisions, so many revisions, is the idea of nesting. Nesting is actually native in CSS, asterisk. I'll get to that in just a moment. But we've got native nesting in CSS. And again, this is something that was heavily, the CSS working group did adopt this over from the Sass syntax. So in the Sass syntax, if you've never done any sort of like nesting of variables, you basically are going to do this thing where, or nesting of rules rather, we're going to do a thing where we're going to define a card, and then inside of our card, we've got some rules. And then inside of that the rules in the card, we're going to say, okay, there's a headline, and the headline inside of that card is specifically that. The paragraph inside of the card is going to be that. Inside of our paragraph, we might have a link. The link is going to have these styles, but then like if you happen to hover on the link in the paragraph in the card, then I've got these like specific rules. Now there's other ways you can do this, of course, and in fact the way that Sass continues to do this is basically it takes this and it outputs it to something that's like a little harder to read but easier for the computer to understand. But we can take that exact syntax, and here's what it looks like to do it in native CSS. That's the difference. So this is CSS, this is SCSS, this is CSS. Now, this was based on, again, a lot of what I'm sure were some fights, because there was some versions of that CSS nesting syntax where it got a little bit crazy. They had a thing where they were like, what if we put every time you nest something, we go like @nest, and then we, why would you do that? Now, there is a little bit that's going to be different. And so I'm going to point out a little bit of the differences between CSS or SCSS nesting and Sass differences, because some do exist. First of all, commenting looks different. Whoa. Anyway, but like we've also got this situation where if you were trying to like in Sass, you wanted to like build out a selector where you were like block hyphen element hyphen hyphen modifier, or anything where you just like we're trying to like programmatically like create a class based on an ampersand, that's actually going to end up looking different and not really do the thing that you want it to do. We've got the idea of like a grid and, which if you do it in that way, you sort of did it weird because now you made a div with the class of grid div. You just wrote that wrong. And then we've also got the situation of like if we've got both a class-based selector and an ID-based selector, and like, okay, sure, yeah, you're not ever supposed to like do that. You're not ever supposed to do, but like it's gonna happen. It's gonna, cause like sometimes I gotta deal with some sort of third-party library, and shit's gonna go weird, and you know, every once in a while you gotta style an ID. So there is a couple of differences, and that's basically that if you're using something where in your CSS nesting, if you're using an ampersand, things looks different. So for example, in this case, in our SAS, what we were trying to do was say, we're going to build a class called block element modifier. Well, those are not recognized as an actual class builder. In this case, if you do this, it thinks you're making block, which you are. The second case, it thinks you're making an element called hyphen an element called hyphen element with a class of block. That's not really what you meant. And then once you threw the modifier on top of that, you made something weird. So, you know, don't do that. In the case of this is actually going to understand as div grid. And in the case of this, if you've got this in actual like nested CSS, the thing that you need to understand is that your foo actually has the exact same specificity as bar, meaning that if you do anything where you nest something like very, very, very specific, and then something not at all specific, it's going to put it in a has selector, which means it's going to have the highest level of specificity. Now, a little bit wonky, but basically it just means I can do this in a simple cheat sheet, which is that we've got our HTML family tree, right? And in this case, we've just got some people. There is a parent. My parent has some children. Some of those children have siblings. Some of those children also will have their own children, grandchildren, and they're going to have siblings as well. So we can kind of understand this like HTML family tree. And in this case, let's say we wanted to select some of these things. Now in SCSS, in SAS, this is the last time I think I'm going to talk to you about SAS because we're going to move on to like pure CSS from here on out. But I might have the situation where like I want to select like the child of the parent. Cool. I could also do it with the ampersand. That ampersand ends up being optional. I want to select the brother of the child of the parent. Okay, cool. Again, that ampersand ends up being basically optional in nearly every case, right? So you're in a lot of these situations, you're going to notice that the thing that's in comments is basically the same selector because their ampersand ends up being optional. However, if you're going over to CSS nesting, know that a bunch of those ampersands are not in fact optional. By the time you're going into the situation of trying to figure out, for example, like my child of the parent, you want to make sure that you're being intentional about your actual ampersands and using those the right way. Because a lot of those times, if you do just like nested, like greater than, it's just not going to understand what that is. So when you're doing that nesting, when you're doing, you know, direct child or sibling or next selector or whatever, just be careful to recognize that like those ampersands are necessary. But the other thing about this is that again, this is actually going to make everything a whole lot smaller because now this is the kind of CSS that actually gets to go out to the browser. A lot of our other nested solutions were all in the form of preprocessors, which is cool, but that also means that you mentally have to go, I'm going to be writing a language that is then going to post-compile to another language. So I need to both recognize the language that I'm working in and also the language that I'm going to output to. So that can be a little bit challenging as opposed to this, where you know that the actual language that you're writing, first of all, you don't have to write Node, you don't have to run Node, but also you can just know that the actual CSS that you're outputting is going to be like fairly safe. Okay, that one was a little bit complicated, and so I want to show you something that super duper 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 isn't. This is a new property in CSS that I just think is neat. And okay, so here we are. bunch of programmers, bunch of people that work on computers all day, bunch of nerds. I wonder if a Monty Python reference will work. Let's find out. Let's find out. Okay, so here's my form, and my form is simply going to ask 3 questions. So I've got 3 questions that I want to ask you here, and that first one is, what is your name, right? And so my name is Lemon, and then I want to just tell you what happens a whole lot of times when I'm just like out in the world. Like, what's your name? And I go, Lemon. And they go like, is that your real name? That's crazy, dude. Your mom called you that? Please have that conversation with me a lot. I like it. So in that situation, obviously, like our input type field, we didn't actually restrict the character count, but it's as long as it's going to be, and so it's going to scroll inside of there. It becomes a little bit more problematic because, like, my quest is like to seek the holy cup. I think it's called, or I don't know, what's that thing that Little John carries around? That. Again, if you were writing something that mattered, losing that context of like what's higher up in the chain can be a little bit frustrating, can be a little bit like not your favorite thing. Unless you're like working on somebody's like performance review, in which case, fuck it, I'm just trying to get that over with as fast as possible. They're great, give them a raise. Hey, here's what I'm gonna be putting in everybody's performance review. To you, personally, I got some feedback. To the bosses, give them more money. That's what a performance review is to me. Anyway, so we've got the situation where we're going to probably like lose some of our context. You notice this last one is long, right? Our favorite color ends up being long, and the reason why it's too long is that I've got a couple of color options, and I've got blue, I've got red, I've got yellow, but that last one is actually going to throw the entire select out. Because now it's going to go, well, I know that there's this one option inside of our select, and I'm going to stretch this entire thing to fit that entire piece of text. So it's not awful, right? Like, it doesn't look like Craigslist, but it's not the super coolest thing, and we could probably make it a little bit better. And the thing is, I actually want to make this a little bit better with one line. So I got 3 rules here, and my 3 rules are I got some padding, I got some min width, and I got some max width. That's really all I got. Now I want to add one more rule to this case, and my rule is going to be something that is very new in CSS, which is field sizing content, meaning that I'm going to be writing a form element, an input, to select a text area, the end. And I want you to just be smart about what content is actually in here. So in doing that and that alone, now we can go into the same sort of situation. So like, what is your name? I told you it was Lemon. Do we really need to go over this again? I guess we do. And then inside of our actual, like, what is your quest? Again, now we have like this thing where we do have this little notchy guy in the corner, which we can use to adjust our thing, but we can say like, to seek the holy five. Yeah, I think it's called 5. And so again, we're going to have the situation where our actual text container is just going to be smart enough to recognize, like, I've got a min value, I've got a max value. I'm going to be respectful of those 2 values. But anywhere in the middle, I'm just going to try to be cool about what content is in here. And in fact, it works the best for selects because, like, if we do go blue, then it's going to be the actual width of blue. Actually, it's not the width of blue because it's our min width. But if we go into the long one, it'll just go ahead and just expand out to there. So, like, that's it. That's pretty much it. Pretty much, I mean, I try to I want to do some in the weeds. I also want to be like, hey, add this one line to your CSS because like it's nice. What else we got? Oh, we got container queries. Okay, this is a fairly big deal, and this is something that's been in the actual spec for a little while. It's really super reliable, and it's almost always the right way to do things at this particular time. So, okay, so we've got our HTML, and like you can imagine what this looks like, right? Like we've got a grid. Our grid's got 3 columns, and then we've got another grid, and that grid's got 2 columns. Okay, so like take a moment and just like figure what that probably looks like. Okay, you imagine it in your mind's eye. Okay, so now we got our CSS, and we're just gonna go like, we're just gonna like create some grids. We're going to be like, I want to make a grid, and this one's going to have 3 columns. This one going to have 2 columns. We're going to have a gap in the middle. Yeah. All right, so if that's what you were imagining, yeah, that's really what we ended up with. This is the kind of thing that we do over and over again because, like, while front-end developers might sometimes consider themselves artists, we're just putting boxes in boxes. I mean, let's face facts. So we've got our grid, which is nice. That's super duper nice, except for it's 2025. And that means that, like, if I do this and this happens, like, that sucks. That's bad. That's just no good. You just did a bad job. And we need to send that one back through peer review. Okay, so now we're going to do the thing that people have done really since the first couple of iPhones. Actually, the thing that people first did with the iPhones was they made m.website.com, which was, oh my God. So didn't those look great? Those were such good looking things. Oh yeah, just like so many like just menus and icons. Oh, it was really good. And then somebody would like share the m dot thing with you, and then you get the like actual mobile thing on your web. Anyway. So eventually, when people stopped being crazy, I'm sorry. Again, I'm an American, so the idea of people stopped being crazy. I just realized the irony of my sentence. Anyway, so eventually, when people started to come up with a situation that made a little bit of sense, they ran into these sort of media queries. Media queries were around even before a lot of like responsive design stuff was. But essentially, what you do is you'd say like, okay, so you're going to be looking at a window, and my window is going to be like X amount of height and X amount of width, and you're going to know that thing, and I want you to kind of like do intelligent work based on that. There's other things that you can do. You can say like, is it in portrait mode? Is it in landscape mode? There's a couple other like media queries we can do, but it's usually width. That's usually what people are working with because it's a pretty reliable indicator of like how big your actual web page is. So we're going to do this in the very normal, boring way to do this, which is just to say I've got my grid with 3 columns, and then once I get down to 940 pixels in my actual web page, once you shrink that thing down to 2. Once we're down to 700 pixels in my browser window, I want you to take the 2 column, I want you to crunch that down to 1. And then once you're in like 620, I want you to take that 3 column and just bring it down to a single column. Not hard, pretty basic, pretty normal, and that's fine. So now we've got this exact same thing where we've got our main section, or we've got our main area, we've got our section area, we've got a couple grids, and then when we go down here, like it, goes from 3 to 2 to 1. That's not mind-breaking. That's not as amazing as me telling you about CSS variables for the first time in your lives. But it is the way that we've been solving those things. Now, of course, that means that, for example, you're going to have to think about this bit of yellow over here on the side because that's going to affect things. A lot of these containers are going to matter, so you just kind of have to like calculate that into all of your designs. But basically, now we've got a responsive grid. So I think we can probably just like ship that code unless... Okay. All right, well, you're right. Like any young product that we had, we created content, and we pretended like what we were interested in was actually like making a web page with content on it. But in fact, what we're doing is just having stuff so that advertisers can put their boxes next to each other. Okay, so cool. Let's take a look at what we're going to do here in our same grid that we had before, and let's just... Okay. All right, well, that looks a little bit different. Okay, so solving this thing by media query alone It's possible. It's definitely possible. It's definitely doable. It's definitely something that people have done over and over again. But the thing is that you're going to have to make sure that you recognize, like, for example, what's the actual size of the ad-based container. And if the ad-based container might move, you might have that situation where, for example, if you're on this breakpoint, the ad's going to be over here. But if you're on this breakpoint, the ad's going to be over here. You might have a whole bunch of different contextual stuff. You might have to write some really, really, really gnarly CSS to actually to create this whole thing in media queries alone. I worked for, not going to tell the company, but it was a company, a large corporation. And they were like, can you please architect our CSS? And I was like, yes, I absolutely will do that. I would love to do that. And they were like, cool, we'll get you started. We've got a media query library already written for you. And I was like, cool, but like I can write code too though. So like, wait, what if I just wrote the code? And they were like, you sure can, but if you don't want to do that, we can give you our media query library. Okay, sounds good, man. Let's yeah, give me that file. So they were like, yeah, so before you get started, you're gonna load this 3 megabyte CSS file, and then you can get started. And I was like, cool, when does the user see your web page? Like, do they just sort of like see a white page? Anyway, point being, we don't have to do this whole thing with complicated media queries. We can just do it on the actual container themselves. So as you notice here, we've got our main area over to the left. We've got our ad area over to the right. And we're going to do this thing and just simply to say, instead of our media queries, we're going to go into the container queries ourselves. So our content area, we're going to let that box measure itself. We're going to let that box go, I am this wide, and based on how wide it is, we're again just going to kind of like move our columns around to say it's this many columns or it's this many columns. And then in our ads, we're kind of do the same thing. So we can just like create, as opposed to just watching the window, we can watch really any rectangle that exists. And we can just put a container query on the rectangle and say, when this rectangle changes, I want you to change rules accordingly. And so that means that we can actually have a situation where our scale goes down from this to this to this to this, and then the advertisers are very happy because the beginning is just, I mean, this is really what the website that they wanted. I think once we make the logo bigger, I think we're probably pretty good. We can make this a little bit fancier too, which is that when you're doing this thing, so this is kind of the most important line that you want to know about, is that inline size. That's the thing of like, hey, you're a container query and I want you to know about that. But instead of actually putting the queries inside of the container that we're watching, we can name those containers, right? So we can say that like, this is our container and that's called the content, and then we can write queries, not necessarily even nested. You can write these queries anywhere and just reference like, when this box is this, meaning you can actually write rules about another box that's not even in that box based on the measurement of this first box. So like, if our stupid ads are visible, then we can just do different rules on that particular thing. Makes for some sort of cleaner code, I think. Okay, I'm gonna show you another thing that I think you've probably seen before, which is a thing that, here's the thing about questions and answers. Here's the thing about questions and answers is that people love accordions. They love accordions. And they love accordions because when you ask somebody a question, there's sort of like a back and forth, right? How are you? I am fine. What I think that people love about accordions is that instead of doing that, an accordion is to say, hello, how are you? Answer me. And don't show me any other questions I asked you before. So we're going to do that. We're going to build an accordion, and this is the way that I tend to write my accordions. We don't really need to care too much about the syntax they're in, but we've got our questions, we've got our answers, we've got our IDs, and I've got some accessibility stuff in there because, like, it matters, right? So we got, JavaScript. No, okay. Sorry. I didn't mean to show you JavaScript. Trigger warning. Shouldn't have done that. Okay, so we've got our HTML with JavaScript, and there's really the only thing that matters. That piece of code that I skipped past is really just doing one thing, which is that it's going to set set the active class on the actual question, and it's going to set a visible class on the answer. That's it. That's all we're doing. We're basically just like toggling some classes. Okay, so cool. So we've got our CSS as our first attempt, and it's going to be really good. We're going to do an overflow hidden, meaning like anything that's not in this box doesn't get to be shown, because this is one of the other cool things about CSS, is that I'm going to draw a box and put content in it. And the first question that CSS is going to ask me is like, do you want your content to be in the box? Because I'm a naughty language. So we're going to say overflow hidden, we're going to have our height auto, and then we're going to do this, right? We're going to make our question, we're going to make our answer, we've got some overflow hidden, we've got some height auto, and like, I think I'm probably ready for the W3 awards. Really just going to submit that right away. But you know, it's fine. Obviously, it's fine. It works. It's fine. But like, it doesn't animate, and that's sort of the main thing. Is like, if I'm gonna go again, and I'm just gonna ask you, like, hey, what's your favorite karaoke song? I really want you to just take 2 seconds to think about it, you know, just like really process that emotion and just like, you know, build suspense, right? So what we're going to do is we need to animate this accordion. So we're going to do that this way, right? We're going to take this thing and we're going to say overflow hidden height auto, or height 0 to height auto, and then we're just going to say like, hey, man, transition this. No problem. Done. Yeah, I'm just going to. Okay, well, that didn't work. That didn't work, that never will work. And the thing is that if you do height auto is not a thing that CSS knows how to calculate to. It doesn't know the end state of auto. It does a divide by zero error, basically, when it tries to figure out what auto looks like. And so the thing that people have done for a very long time is to try to solve this with a different idea, where they basically go like, oh, I'm going to take this, and I'm just going to give it some sort of fixed value. Now, in fact, jQuery still does this. Angular, in a lot of cases, does this. Material does this. Okay, all right. We'll talk later. But essentially what you're going to have is a situation where it's going to kind of like, it's going to have a starting value, it's going to have an ending value, and then depending, it'll either do CSS or JavaScript calculations to figure out like what those intermediary values are. So we can do that like in pure CSS, but like it's a problem because our content is obviously bigger here, our content is smaller here, and down in here. Okay, it sucks a lot. It sucks a lot. This is objectively worse. Let's see if we can do something that's better than that. We can do something that's better than that. So if we go into our next example, we're going to put CSS Grid to the rescue. CSS Grid is a thing that I write a lot. I really, really like it. And that means that we've actually got something. And I'm about to show you something that is, in fact, a hack. It is absolutely a hack, and I'm not going to deny that. But we've got our grid, and we're going to say that this has a grid template of rows of 1 FR. If you're not familiar with the concept of FR, that's something that was introduced in the CSS Grid spec, but it's basically saying 1 fraction. And so 1 fraction can be divided in any sort of way you can play with this. You can say like 1 fraction, or we can say like 1 fraction, meaning two equal parts. We can say I want you to do 4 equal parts together. We can also say 20%, and then whatever's left over. That's the cool thing about fractions, is you're able to say just like whatever's available. So I can even say like I got 210 pixels over here, I've got 2 rem over here, and then whatever you got left, like that's the remaining fraction that I want. But this also exists. 0 fraction is a valid thing. And 0 fraction is an animatable value. Okay, yeah, you're right. That's weird. So, like I said, this is super a hack, but it's totally possible. So we've got a situation we're going to say, here's our grid, and it's got 0 units. And then we're going to go, okay, when it's visible, now it's going to go from 0 fractions to 1 fraction. And then we have to like add some other shit. Okay, there's some other shit too. But anyway, so we're going to do those things. And now we've got a situation where we're going from 0 fraction to 1 fraction. And like it works. Okay, here's the thing. If I had this faster, it would look less janky. The fact that I put it on 2 seconds was for a couple of versions, but like as you can see, the animation works, and if it was like 200 milliseconds, you'd probably feel okay. At 2 seconds, yeah, okay, this could look better. This could look better, but again, if this was a fast enough animation, we would be okay. But there is actually a better way. There's a better way in new modern CSS, and we've got something called calc size. My clicker is dead. That's awesome. Okay. So there's calc size. It's back! It's back! Okay, so calc size, we're going to go back to our first example here. We've got our height of 0. We've got our, the same thing that we were doing before, where we had our transition that didn't work. But instead of this, we're actually going to say, hey, I need you to pay attention to the size of this particular element. So this height is auto, or this height is a measurable quantity. And just by saying that, just by saying I need you to measure this, it actually will. So now our first example that we had, the one that actually worked, we've got an actual calc size that does not suck. 2 seconds is still too long for this animation. It absolutely is, but we've got something that actually does exactly what we were looking for. And I'm pretty happy with that. It actually works on width too. So if you do a situation where you could go like, hey, I want to reply, or do you want to reply all? You want to send this email to your parents, forward, funny meme I thought you would like, crying, laughing emoji. Any of these sort of things, you can do this on any value. Okay. I got some more for you. I got starting style, right? So we're going to make a hamburger menu. So a hamburger menu, again, you've seen this before. We've got some CSS here for my actual like hamburger menu, and then I've got this thing, right? We've seen that, right? You want to learn about us? You want to buy some crypto or whatever? You want to see some legal stuff, which is like, please don't sue us. This is a rug pull. So we've got sorry. Okay, so we've got a hamburger menu, and basically that's all we need to say, right? We've got a hamburger menu, and it's either saying that like this hamburger menu is visible or it's not. That's all we're doing. We're just toggling a class. And so we started off here, right, in our actual thing, so that we had something that was like properly locked to the screen. And then we're going to say, okay, so start off transitioning this. Max Burger is a place that I think about so often, and I hope I get back there today. So anyway, so we're gonna have this like sort of transition over like 100% this way, and then when it's visible, we're gonna transition it in here. Cool, great, awesome. So, and when somebody visits your page and they're about to see your hamburger menu, they're going to see that. Essentially because you said, I want to animate this property, and I want you to start it off over here. It's going to go, okay, I'm going to reference to the thing, and then this thing comes over, okay, cool. And it's just going to do that every time it loads. Now, there's a whole bunch of weird hacks that you can do as you sort of like toggle or like loaded class or whatever. There's a bunch of stuff that you could have here, but actually what you can do instead is to have something called starting style. So in starting style, you're going to say, okay, I want you to translate this thing over to the side, ease that thing out, and actually, when you start, I want you to start in this state. So whatever like CSS properties that you want to do, whether you're animating them or not, you can say, okay, when you actually first put into the DOM, I want you to have this particular style. And we can do that, and then we have this, right? So we've got our hamburger menu. Everything is on 2 seconds because like what's fun if it's not a slow animation? Okay. We could actually do something here too, where there's like a fire popover, where we essentially just have like some styles where we've got our ending style is over here, and we just like say, I'm going to transition, and then here's the starting style, meaning when this div is created, you're going to start from the starting style and like animate out. Or we could have a situation where like I'm going to click this button, it's going to add a div. That div isn't yellow, but it starts yellow because the starting style was set to yellow. Okay, I want to do some animations here since we're already in this vein, and so we've got some photos. I'm going to grid out some photos, left, right side, right? So we're going to have some images. Cool, awesome. And then what we got is a situation where we're going to kind of like make a 2x2 grid, and we're just going to kind of like offset the left and right. This one's going to be a little bit higher up. This one's going to be a little bit down. And it's going to look nice. It's going to look nice. We got some stock photos. So I'll just randomly generate it from Unsplash. And, that's, yeah, sure. Yeah, that's, yep. Yeah, whatever. I want to go home. Let's ship it. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. The prompt was Salvador Dali has a neck tattoo and ear gauges. Um, um, what you got? Okay. Yeah, sure. Yeah. hmm Yeah. Yeah, okay. All right. All right. No problem. No problem. Okay. Yeah, sure. 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 So in this particular case, there's a bunch of things we could reach for. We could go for green sock, or we could go for anime.js. The homepage of anime.js looks so cool, by the way, if you haven't seen it. We can go scroll magic. We can go animate unscroll. There's a bunch of different JavaScript libraries we can do for this thing. We can actually just use CSS itself. So in this case, what we're going to say is we've got our grid and it's got our like whatever, but we're going to add a little line here that says, okay, when these actually come into view, I want you to do an animation timeline on that view to say this is like 35% of the screen, and I want you to go from 25% opacity and down to 100% opacity and up. And so just in that, without any JavaScript whatsoever, we created this situation. So now we've got some stock photos, and then it does this. Like, oh, I mean, it's a bit much. It's a bit, I feel like every one of these demos that I'm doing is like a bit much, but like, we've got something that I think works. Like, it goes away, it goes back. We're feeling pretty good about this pretty elegant solution. What do you? More, huh? Yep. All right. You want more, baby? Yeah, okay. All right. So we're gonna, like, as I said, we got our like animation timeline says like when this thing enters, you're gonna do stuff. Why don't we just throw an exit on top of it? So we're gonna put another animation timeline that says we're gonna exit out, and we're gonna have a different animation that goes like the other way to a different point of opacity, and we're gonna cover 45% of the screen because that means that basically we're gonna animate just about every pixel that happens. You wanted more, you got more. Okay, what do you think? Wow, that was, you know what? After seeing so many JavaScript animation libraries creating insane things that are hard to look at, the fact that CSS can do something equally as visually offensive, I think is a win. I think it's a win for all of us. But actually, since we're doing all of that, we're actually going to take this and we're just going to wrap it in this, which is that we can say, hey, if you are super into like big old animations, no problem. Here's your big old animation. We're just going to say, if you do specifically say, please don't show me, I have vestibular problems or whatever it is, we can just say, if you don't want animation, I'm not going to do these particular things to you. Has is my favorite thing that's in CSS right now. Like, since grid, there's nothing that I've been more interested. Okay, so in CSS, you're able to do this, right? You're able to say, like, I got a target person, and any person inside of that, select that. Cool. That's everybody inside of that target person. We can say, okay, I want you to select just the direct descendants of that person, just that person's children. It'll do that, no problem. We can also say, okay, I want you to take a person and select the next sibling, right? So I've got my target person right up there. I want you to select the next person down, and it's going to do that. We can also say, I want you to select every sibling of that particular person, and it will do that, asterisk, as long as that person comes later, because it has to come later. So if I've got my target person right over here, it won't get that person's earlier sibling. It'll only get their younger sibling because CSS has always worked down. Always gone from top to bottom, which means that this selector does not exist. We can't say, I want you to target a person, and then anyone above them, I want you to do things to. And that's a problem because we need that a lot. And so now we've got something called has that changes so much. So we've got a situation where, for example, we're going to make some cards, right? And we're going to say, like, this is my cards, and, you know, there's some content in them, but the point is that one of them has an image and one of them doesn't. So in that particular case, I want you to say, okay, so if this does have an image, I want you to do some different styles to this. And without changing anything else semantically there, without having some sort of like specific classes, we can say that in the situation, if it has an image or if it doesn't have an image, it's actually going to create these things because it's going to have a has selector for images inside of that card itself. We're going to do the funniest thing that could ever be done, which is not to quote Monty Python once, but to do the same Monty Python quote twice. So now we've got a situation where we're like, what is your name? And that's a required field. We've got what is your quest, and we don't care. That was actually just like data aggregation. And then we've got our favorite color, right? So we've got 2 required fields, 1 optional field. And what we can actually do is end up with this, which is fine, except for I can actually take this and style it up with has to say, okay, inside of this field set here, I might have a required field. And if I do, I want you to take the label that's next to that required field, put that little red asterisk on it. I might also say, okay, actually, if this particular thing has focus, not only do I want you to style the thing that has focus, but also I want you to affect the label itself. And if any of these fields actually have invalid content in them, then why don't you just put a red ring around that actual box? So with that, now we've got this situation where our input is here, our label's above the input, our box is holding all of those, but we know that our input here is invalid, which means that it got the red ring the moment this went valid. That red ring went away, but our asterisk stayed because it knew that it was a required field, so it's going to always stay on there. So there's so much in has that are impressive. Like another grid. Okay, so we got another grid. And we've got a situation where we've got like our 3-up grid. It's fine, cool, whatever, ship it. I'm just going to add one more box here. And it's going to add one more box. Yeah, okay, sure. Yeah, another box. Seems all right. All right. If you're not familiar, designers hate widows. Essentially, like this sort of situation is something that will drive them crazy. So we can actually do this programmatically with has. We can actually say, I've got a grid of three items. If there happens to be a 4th, then why don't you turn that into a 2 grid so that it doesn't have that widow? We could do another thing where we're like, instead of that, actually, why don't you turn that into a flex box and like align that thing to the center, and then it'll be 3 grids still, but that 3rd thing will be in the center. Our designer will be happy then, I promise. Our designer will be happy. So with those 2 different options, we've got something where we can take our 3 grid, we can turn it into a 2 grid, or we can turn it into a 3 grid with that one thing in the middle, just with that has selector. There's not. Not's the opposite of has. There's some stuff you could do, right? You could say like, if my link doesn't go to an outside link, style it this way. I could say if my input is not disabled, I could do this thing. Anything that essentially you could do in has, you could do the opposite of it in not, and that's pretty cool. Text wrap is a concept where you can actually say text wrap pretty, which like, how could that not make me happy? To say text wrap pretty. So if we've got a situation where we go back to our conversation about widows, we've got this situation where I just put in some text and I let it wrap however it's going to. So default text is text wrap wrapped. That last word's going to end up on the last line. Uneven text blocks. That last word's going to end up on the last line. It's fine. It's obviously not wrong, but it could be a little bit better. So our second example here, we're actually doing, instead of that, we're doing text wrap pretty to say, I don't want you to do anything major. I don't want you to go crazy. But in this case, 4 is not on the first line. 4 is on the second line in order to create a situation where like those pieces of text are in the middle. Similar, like paragraphs, if I didn't do that, like would have been on the line above, paragraphs would have been on the other one. So that's one that you can do if you just want to have a gentle touch. If you do not want to have a gentle touch, if you want to have control over the words, then you can actually do text wrap balance. So text wrap balance is going to be like, I'm going to create these rectangles, and inside of this particular case, like where's the median, and I'm going to try to like control some Line speed round. Okay, yeah, speed round. Yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, cool, 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 cool. Okay, great. Okay, so layers, layers. What about CSS? So CSS is like 3 letters. It's cascading style sheets, and people are like, "That's awesome," except for I don't like the cascade. Cascade shouldn't exist. If you're doing that and you have to work with somebody else's code, you can actually put things inside of layers, meaning that you can actually say, here's a layer and here's some rules, and here's a layer and here's some rules, and here's a layer and here's some rules, and then you can just like rearrange them. This is not a thing that I don't. If there's a use case for this with new code, I don't know what it is, but I think that the use case for inheriting some other people's code and having to mess with their cascade is actually a pretty cool thing in layers. Dark light is just a simple toggle to say, what mode are you in? Are you in dark or light mode? And depending on whether or not you're in dark or light mode, we're going to do this thing or that thing. So just a simple Boolean switch, right? Our text color is going to be either black or white. Our background color is going to be either white or black. There's other ways to do this, of course, but this is a good way to just kind of like do it as a single one-liner property. Hey, did you know CSS has TypeScript now? It does. I mean, that's TypeScript. So I can basically define a variable and say that my variable it has a certain syntax. I can say that my variable has a default starting property. So I can actually define in my thing, I'm going to create these different CSS variables, and when you interface with them, hey, here's what you should know about them. That means that you've got some type ahead hints. Now you don't actually have compilation errors because there's no such thing as compilation, but you do actually have the idea of the hinting of those properties themselves. Styling a scroll bar is actually possible. All you have to do is write that. Just kidding, there's a bunch of other shit. There's like vendor prefix shit or whatever. But like, if you want to, you can. It's fine. It's not illegal. First letter is a thing that we had a long time trying to solve in the right way. Because first letter was a property that existed for a while, but there wasn't this initial letter thing. And so you'd create a situation where you had like your paragraph, and then you'd be like, okay, the very first letter, I want it to be just a giant, Old English T with a dragon and whatever. And now I gotta like write weird float rules, and the moment you deal with a CSS float, everything kind of goes to shit. And so what we have now is not just the concept of first letter, but we have the idea of that initial letter styling, meaning that we can actually create I'm not killing time until this loads. No. Okay, so now we've got a situation where our text comes over and our L actually gets to eat up that space without me writing a whole bunch of float rules, because all of this happens in this initial letter thing. So I've got my height first, I've got my width second, meaning that I could take this and make that number bigger. And now my actual height is going to get bigger, and I could take my width and say, eat more of that actual width, and just like put that wherever I want to inside of that thing without having to do a whole bunch of bespoke things. Hey, you're the browser, you know what letters are, so why don't you take this letter and make it this many letters? I don't want to close the whole presentation, please. Unless you do. I mean, fair enough. Okay. Yes, thank you very much. All right. So finally, in some takeaways, I got some things that you can learn from. CSS Wrapped is something that the Google dev team has been doing for a little while. There's some summaries here of everything they've done, and it's pretty cool. They did one in 2023 as well. So those are good things to sort of check up on. This is the actual browser manufacturer saying, like, here's what we added. There's another thing, CodePen. I mean, CodePen is always like a really great resource. I really like just going to CodePen and just typing in CSS only, just to see, like, I mean, sometimes there's insane stuff. Like Cobra Winfrey managed to make Doom with CSS only. It doesn't work, but like it looks cool. So if you do CSS only in CodePen, that's always a good reference. Another thing that's a good reference is CSS Tricks. That almanac is fantastic. And another thing that's a good reference is like actual human beings, right? There's a lot of human beings out here that are passionate experts in CSS. You've got Leah Veru, you've got Jen Simmons, like so many people that I've learned from. You've got Amy Kaepernick as an actual like CSS expert, also in this space, and somebody that you can learn from, but like not her. Like Yeah, Kevin Powell is great. Like Miriam Suzanne is excellent. I don't remember who that other person there was under the grid, but like if you were looking for like 6 experts in CSS, one of them is in this room. Um, And of course, you can hit me up. So there's my Lemon at Ahoy Lemon. That's a deprecated service. I don't know what that is. There's some sort of bird that I spent some time on, but not anymore. And the session eyes, there's GitHub. And if you want to get this talk again, there's the address for this talk. ahoylemon.github.xy new CSS. ahoylemon.xyz is my website. So like, find me around. I'm around. I like talking about CSS. I like talking about lots of stuff. Clearly, I like talking about lots of stuff. And so like, let's just do some stuff together. So that's me. That's my daughter. She's the best. And thank you so very much.